Two hydrangeas can sit side by side in the same yard, get the same sun, the same water, the same soil, and one of them comes back every single year loaded with blooms while the other one grows beautiful green leaves and produces nothing. Not damaged, not diseased, just completely silent. And 9 times out of 10, the difference isn't luck. It isn't the plant. It's one decision that got made with a pair of pruners at exactly the wrong moment. Hydrangea is the one shrub in most American yards where pruning at the wrong time doesn't just look sloppy, it can wipe out an entire year of flowers before they ever had a chance to form. Today, I'm covering exactly when to prune your hydrangea, why the timing matters as much as it does, and the specific technique for each major type. So you stop guessing and start getting the full loaded blooms this plant is actually capable of. Before we get into it, drop the type of hydrangea you're growing in the comments. Mophead, Panicle, Annabelle, Oakleaf, whatever you've got, along with your growing zone. The pruning rules genuinely change depending on which one you're working with, and I want to make sure you walk away from this knowing exactly what applies to your plant. Let's get into it. Number 1. Before you touch a single stem, answer this one question, because it determines everything else in this video. Does your hydrangea bloom on old wood, or does it bloom on new wood? Old wood means stems that grew last year and are already sitting there through the winter. New wood means stems the plant is putting out fresh this current season. Here's why this matters more than almost anything else you'll learn about hydrangea care. Some varieties form next year's flower buds back in late summer or early fall, right on those old stems, and those buds then sit dormant all winter long. If you prune those particular stems off at the wrong time, you're not tidying the plant up. You are physically removing next year's flowers before they ever opened. Other varieties don't form any flower buds at all until they start actively growing again in spring, on stems that didn't even exist yet the season before. Those you can cut back hard in late winter, and it costs you nothing because the buds haven't formed yet. So which is your plant? Big leaf hydrangea, the classic mophead with the big round pom-pom blooms, and its lace cap cousin with the flatter, lacy flower heads. Both bloom on old wood. So does mountain hydrangea. So does oakleaf hydrangea, which you can usually spot by its leaves shaped like actual oak leaves, and which also gives you dark red fall color and peeling bark for winter interest. Climbing hydrangea, the vining type that covers fences and walls, is also an old wood bloomer. All 4 of those get pruned right after their flowers fade in summer, and that is genuinely your only real window each year. Panicle hydrangea and smooth hydrangea work the opposite way. Panicle is the one with big cone-shaped or football-shaped flower clusters. Think limelight or the old-fashioned PG variety. Smooth hydrangea is the one most people just call Annabelle, big round white globes on softer stems. Both bloom on new wood, so you prune them in late winter or very early spring before any new growth has started. Because the buds simply don't exist yet at that point, there's no way to accidentally cut off blooms on these 2, which makes them the forgiving half of your hydrangea bed. If you have one of the reblooming varieties, something like Endless Summer, you get a bit of a safety net built in, since those bloom on both old and new wood. A poorly timed prune, or a rough winter, might cost you the old wood flowers, but you'll still get a second flush later in the season from new growth. It's not a reason to be careless, but it does make those particular plants more forgiving of a mistake than a strictly old wood-only variety. If you genuinely don't know what you're growing, look at the flower shape and bloom timing. Round pom-poms or flat lacy clusters that show up early in summer usually mean old wood. Cone-shaped clusters that show up mid to late summer usually mean panicle. Oak-shaped leaves mean oak leaf. No guessing required there. When you're not sure, the safest move is to wait 1 full season and just watch it before you cut anything. And a quick note on climbing hydrangea specifically, since it's the one people forget about entirely. It's a genuine vine and a vigorous one, capable of climbing 30 or 40 feet up, a wall, fence, or mature tree once it's established. It blooms on old wood just like big leaf and oak leaf, so the same after-flowering summer window applies. But in practice, most climbing hydrangeas need very little pruning beyond guiding growth in the direction you want and keeping it off gutters or siding. It's also one of the slower hydrangeas to mature, so give a young one a few years to settle in before you expect much bloom out of it at all. Don't mistake a young, still establishing plant for one that's been pruned wrong. Tell me in the comments, based on what you just heard, are you dealing with an old wood or a new wood hydrangea? If you're not sure yet, say that too, and I'll try to help narrow it down based on what you describe. Number 2. For old wood hydrangeas, here's exactly when and how to cut. Once your big leaf, mountain, oak leaf, or climbing hydrangea finishes flowering in summer, that's your window, and it's a fairly short one. If you're just doing routine deadheading, follow the spent flower stem down until you hit the first healthy pair of leaves or buds, and cut just above that point at roughly a 45-degree angle. For most established plants, that's genuinely all the maintenance they need in a typical year. If your plant has gotten leggy, overcrowded, or the bloom count has been declining over the past few seasons, you can go a step further, but do it right after flowering, not later. Cut up to about a third of the oldest, thickest stems all the way down at the base. This pushes the plant to send up vigorous new growth from the ground, which will mature and start blooming within a year or two without you sacrificing the entire plant's flowers the way a full hard cutback would. Think of it as a gradual rebuild instead of hitting reset on the whole shrub at once. One important caution if you're in a colder climate, roughly zone 6 and colder, growing big leaf hydrangea specifically. Even with perfect summer pruning timing, a hard winter can still kill back some of those old wood buds on its own. If that's happened to you before, hold off on any spring cleanup of that plant until after your last frost, once you can actually see new leaves emerging. That way, you're only removing stems that are genuinely dead from winter damage instead of guessing in early spring and cutting away wood that still had live, healthy buds on it. Number 3. For new wood hydrangeas, here's your window and technique. Panicle and smooth hydrangea both get pruned in late winter or very early spring, before any new growth has started for the season. For Panicle hydrangea, cut your main stems back by about a third to a half of their total length. Look for a pair of buds along the stem and make a clean, flat cut just above them. Not an angled one, since Panicle hydrangea grows its buds in pairs directly across from each other rather than staggered. One thing to avoid completely with Panicle hydrangea, don't cut it down to the ground. Unlike smooth hydrangea, Panicle types build up a real woody framework over the years, sometimes almost tree-like, and that structure is genuinely an asset, giving you a sturdier plant with better supported blooms. Work with that framework instead of removing it every year. Smooth hydrangea, your Annabelle types, are the most forgiving hydrangea you can own. In late winter, you can cut the entire shrub back to somewhere between 6 and 12 inches off the ground, and it will regrow and rebloom the same year with zero issue, since it's working purely from new wood. The catch is that Annabelle's naturally soft stems can struggle to hold up those big round blooms once they're fully open, especially after a heavy rain. So a hard cutback sometimes means some flopping later in summer. If that's bothered you before, leave the framework a bit taller instead, somewhere around 18 to 24 inches rather than cutting all the way down. You'll get a sturdier plant and blooms that hold themselves up better at the cost of slightly less dramatic size. If this level of type-by-type detail is what's been missing from other hydrangea videos you've watched, hit subscribe now. This channel breaks down the actual reasoning behind these seasonal rules every week, not just generic tips, and it's free. Number 4. Here's a detail almost nobody explains, and it lets you actually control what your blooms look like. For your new wood types specifically, Panicle and smooth hydrangea, how hard you prune directly changes the flowers you get. Cut it back hard and you'll get fewer flower clusters, but each one will be noticeably bigger, sometimes dramatically so. Prune it lightly and you'll get a lot more flower clusters, but each one will be smaller. Neither is wrong, it's entirely a style choice. If you want a handful of oversized show-stopping blooms, prune hard. If you'd rather have a fuller shrub absolutely covered in smaller flowers, go easy on it. This is one of the only genuinely controllable variables in hydrangea care, and most gardeners never realize they're making this choice at all when they prune. Number 5. The dead, damaged, and diseased rule applies to every single hydrangea, all year long, no exceptions. Regardless of type, regardless of season, you can and should remove any dead, damaged, or diseased wood the moment you spot it. This isn't seasonal, it's basic plant hygiene, and it actually protects the rest of the shrub by improving airflow and cutting off any entry point for disease to spread further. Use a clean pair of bypass pruners, the scissor-style blades rather than the anvil type that can crush stems. And if you're working across multiple hydrangeas, especially any showing signs of leaf spot or mildew, wipe your blades down with rubbing alcohol between plants so you're not spreading anything through the whole bed. There's also a small timing nuance worth knowing for big leaf hydrangeas' spent blooms specifically. You can technically remove faded flower heads as soon as they fade, but a lot of experienced growers actually leave them on through winter on purpose, since the old dried flower heads offer a small amount of frost protection to the tender growth buds sitting just below them on the stem. If you garden somewhere with unpredictable late frosts, leaving those dried blooms in place until spring, then cutting back to the first healthy bud once you can see the new growth is a safer bet than tidying the plant up the moment it finishes flowering. Number 6. Why timing is the actual reason most hydrangeas stop blooming. Not disease, and not bad luck. Here's the scenario that plays out in yards everywhere every single fall. Someone does a big cleanup of their garden beds before winter, cutting everything back to look neat, and treats every shrub in the row the same way, hydrangea included. The following spring, that hydrangea leaves out completely fine, looks perfectly healthy, plenty of green growth. And then it just sits there, no flower buds the entire season. It's not diseased, it's not struggling. The buds simply aren't there anymore because they were already formed on that old wood back in late summer, and the fall cleanup removed them before anyone knew what those stems were actually holding. If a big leaf, mountain, oak leaf, or climbing hydrangea skips a season, wrong time pruning is the very first thing to check, well before you start worrying about soil, sun, or disease. Recovery from that mistake usually takes another full year or two since the plant has to rebuild that old wood from scratch before it can bloom on it again. Number 7. A quick note on fertilizer since it works alongside good pruning, not instead of it. Hydrangeas aren't heavy feeders, and a lot of established plants in decent garden soil do just fine without much supplemental feeding at all. If you do want to give yours a boost, a slow release, balanced fertilizer applied once in early spring, right as new growth is starting, is usually plenty. Go easy on the nitrogen specifically, since too much pushes out lush, leafy growth at the direct expense of flowers, which undoes a lot of the work you just put into pruning correctly. Here's your complete hydrangea pruning checklist before you go. Figure out whether you're growing an old wood or new wood variety, since that one answer determines your entire approach. For big leaf, mountain, oak leaf, and climbing hydrangea, prune only right after flowering in summer, and in cold zones, hold off on spring cleanup until new leaves confirm what actually survived winter. For panicle and smooth hydrangea, prune in late winter or early spring before new growth starts, cutting panicle back by 1/3 to 1/2 while keeping its woody framework intact, and cutting smooth hydrangea anywhere from 6 inches for maximum impact to 24 inches for sturdier stems. Remember that harder pruning on new wood types means fewer but bigger blooms, while lighter pruning means more but smaller ones. Remove dead, damaged, or diseased wood anytime, any season, no exceptions. And if a hydrangea skipped blooming this year, check your pruning timing before you assume anything else is wrong. Subscribe if you haven't already, hit the bell so you don't miss the next one, and before you go, tell me 2 things in the comments. What type of hydrangea are you growing, and has it ever skipped a season of blooming on you? I read every comment, and it genuinely shapes what this channel covers next. Now, go take a look at your hydrangea and figure out exactly which window you're working with.